Welcome to Therabytes, where we bring you bite-sized episodes, each one a piece of the puzzle that helps to explain the therapy world, the research behind it all, and how it relates to families. Hello, my name is Dr. Dana Poole. I'm a physiotherapist and the clinical lead at the Healthy Strides Foundation. It is my privilege to be hosting this podcast, one that is directed for parents of children with neurodisabilities. We hope to be able to answer some of your questions through this format. But to navigate our way through these big questions, we have the one and only, the lovely Naresha co-hosting this podcast. Welcome, Naresha.
Thanks, Dana. Hopefully it's been helpful for everyone listening. I do have another question to cover off today.
I love that you've been preparing these questions. I feel like I'm all geared up for what it might be. And so far, the questions have been really great in just starting up conversation, which has been so wonderful. But before you get to your question, I would like to be able to share some new research that I've just found recently in my Did You Know That segment. Did you know that the reason why we like certain foods is actually related to a neural pathway?
No, really?
This is why sometimes it's an uphill battle, man. So they've actually found, this is done in mice. So that is one caveat. But as they talked about the study, I thought, actually, this relates to me as well. So especially foods that are high in fats and sugars, we find them irresistible.
Wait, stop there. It's not just you. I'm sure it's the rest of the world.
Right. We find them irresistible. And when you crave, I certainly know this, when I crave one, I usually crave both. Like I don't just want something that's really fatty. I also want something that's got a lot of sugar in it as well. So the reason for this is these researchers from the Monell Chemical Senses Center, and they recently published this.
Who was it from?
The Monell Chemical Senses Center. I think that's how I've said it right. I don't say things properly sometimes. Okay. Published in Cell Metabolism, okay? So they found that there's a neural mechanism, as in a separate pathway in our brain that goes to our gut, basically, that makes these rich foods high in these macronutrients really appealing. And when they are both together, it is supercharged.
Wow, that's why I like my sweet and savoury together.
There we go.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why we love donuts with
chips. Crisps, I mean.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's pretty amazing. So look, they were talking about how, takeaway food can be really rewarding. It's really related to these vagal nerves, these drop of dopamine. So it just makes everything incredibly rewarding. So the next time you have a craving for both a sugary and a fatty delight, know that there is just a separate neural pathway that so far has been proven in mice. They need to look at it in humans. But right now, I'm feeling like I can see how it relates to me even right now. I can imagine what I'd like to have right
I'm
now.
already thinking about it too.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a good new bit of research about our gut-brain circuit.
Chocolate.
And
tomato soup in winter. Oh,
together?
That's delicious. Together.
What? I have never heard about that before.
I know, people always look at me weird, but it does things to me. It's amazing.
Okay, well, next time you guys have some tomato soup, have some chocolate with it.
Oh, sorry, Naresha. This is an interrupt by the producer.
Oh, no.
We need to have the story as to how that combination came about.
Yeah,
Just really quickly.
That's true. Is there a backstory? Was it an accident?
So.
It happened some Cadbury and some soup?
It was at work, obviously at work. It's freezing cold. I don't know why it's freezing cold in there. But in winter and all you want is like a mug of soup. Anyway, tomato sauce is what I can obviously have. Can't have chicken soup, right? So I go for tomato sauce. And then all of a sudden, caramello koala, fundraising. Dude, I love those things. Anyway, always chuck them in the freezer.
Yeah.
Finish your bite in the morning. Chuck them in the freezer. And then in the afternoon, after lunch, I don't know why, it felt like soup. And then bring out the caramello koala.
Wow.
And it was just like a match made in heaven.
Wow.
I love it.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
I love that. That's cool. I'll give it a go. Look, I'll give it a go. I do love my food. I'll give this a go. But I'm glad this research, speaks to us so well. But let's get into the burning question that you have before I digress too much into our fatty, sugary delights. What question do you have for me today, Naresha?
All right. I'm sure other families have the same question. How do we make our funds last every 12 months? In my case, obviously, I'm dependent on NDIS. But, I mean, other than NDIS, I'm sure there are, everybody's savings that try and help their children, get to their best life.
Yeah.
My little boy has obviously cerebral palsy and affects his upper and lower limbs. A little bit of dystonia in there. Every day is challenging.
Yeah.
But to have the necessary funds to help him accomplish these tasks, day-to-day tasks, right, is kind of hard. We tend to have 12 months worth of NDIS, but we kind of fall short around the 9th or 10th mark.
Right.
And that's just utilising the necessary occupational therapy, speech, physiotherapy, and obviously equipment that we need to help him get day-to-day.
Yeah.
So any advice?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this is a big one. And for our listeners who are not in Australia, just a quick FYI, NDIS stands for the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which was introduced a few years ago in its entirety across Australia. And it really helps to support people living with disability to access things within the community, improve their quality of life. And that's the intent of it. And it's really world leading. It's certainly not perfect, but there's nothing like this anywhere else in the world. And so I'd love to start it that way, to go, this has been a really new journey for so many of us. And
sure has.
The question about how to make it last, look, there's obviously a lot of policy things there as well that I'm not going to get into because I have no control over those things. But what it is that I can really recommend here is hopefully some really practical tips. But whether it's your own funding, whether it's your NDIS funding or your own funding itself, you might be saving up, you might be looking at those avenues or fundraising. At the end of the day, there's only so much funds available. What I like to put in there is funds and time. Those two things are really important to be considered together. So the first thing I would say is, if you are running out of therapy time or funding time, the first thing to say is evaluate, am I doing too much therapy? And sometimes that's a good question just to reflect on.
That's right. How much therapy is too much?
How much? Yeah, because I think you want to do the best for your child. You want them to achieve everything they want to be able to achieve. But there's always a time cost, not just in funding, but in time. So by going to lots of therapy, you're trading also time that they can be at school, trading time when they can be with friends and family. Sure. And those areas are equally as important because you also learn a lot of skills in that space too. So how much therapy is too much therapy? And that is a big question that we should always be asking. The big thing about this is knowing that other things matter too, and what you gain from those other spaces. That's the first thing to evaluate.
Didn't even think about that,
right?
Really. Yep.
Because when you are pulling out of school too much and the teachers are going, hey, what's actually happening? That's a good guide to kind of go, ooh, am I doing too much? It's just a trigger. And maybe you're not, but maybe you are. Yep. Let's make this as an opportunity to think about that first. Right. Because if they're missing out on school and they have to make up for it in the other time, well, then they're not going to get enough sleep or enough chill time, because our kids also need to chill too. Yeah. So it's looking at that balance. Is our child a happy child? Are they looking like they're a bit stressed or sleep deprived? Those are some nice signs to look at it too.
Okay.
But the other sign is also, as a family, is it too much for the family? I'm running around doing so many things. That's also a bit of a sign to kind of go, maybe I'm doing too much. Like, I'm always late for work. I can't do what I like to do. I don't get to do out things that make me feel good as a person too. So there is such thing as too much therapy.
Oh, definitely, right? Especially when you're looking at the kilometres on your car.
Yeah, that's right. So there is a time cost there as well. So the finances is one thing, but evaluate the time in the context of the child and their family. The next part I like to look at after that is, if I'm doing the therapy, am I doing the right kind of therapy? Because are you doing too much therapy because you're not quite seeing the outcomes? Okay. Or are you doing too much therapy because you feel like you want to do it all? And I would say it's really important to evaluate the type of therapy that you're doing. And the type of therapy that you're doing just should be evidence-based, because at least the evidence tells you, like we covered a few weeks ago, of what's the most effective way to get that outcome. Now, the reason why I harp on about evidence-based, even more so within this context, is because this is what matters. So we need to know what interventions are available to produce a certain outcome. And that outcome is that goal that you have set. So for your little boy, you're saying, everyday task, it could be access. What is it that he wants to achieve? The job then of the therapist is to go, okay, these interventions show that if you do it this particular way, you're going to achieve this outcome in this period of time. That already gives you an idea of what you can achieve. Sometimes things might take a year to achieve. Sometimes some skills take a few years to achieve. That is the realistic achievement timeline, depending on the kind of goal. because
Sure.
at the end of the day, you're not working on that every single day. You know, you also go to school, you've got a lot of other things to happen as well. But the key of making sure that whatever it is you do in therapy lasts, it means that we actually have to teach the skill in a way where those skills last. So if you're continually going back to learn a skill, you do have to start to question, actually, is this approach the best approach? Because I keep having to go back to relearn this skill. Ideally, if you can learn a skill in a particular way, you don't have to go back and revisit it again, right?
That's true. My little boy took a while to get toilet trained. You know, I thought it would only take 6 months. 2 years it took.
Right.
2 years of a lot of frustration, but a lot of patience.
Yeah.
But he finally got there, and now it's amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just getting that, the process, the steps that needs to be taken,
That's right.
providing the right environment.
Yes.
Making sure he has a stepper to step on, making sure the stepper doesn't move each time.
Yes.
Asian bathrooms. My mum's bathroom has towels everywhere, you know, outside the toilet screen, outside under the toilet.
Yes. Everything's
it's
slippery,
just crazy.
everything's a hazard. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that you brought that one up, because that's a really important skill that can take some time, and it can take some time in children that don't have a diagnosis of a neurodisability as well. So we'll start with that. But the approach of which he needs to learn that skill in, a big part of it is motor learning. Like, how do I actually do this?
Right.
In a set of circumstances that, you know, are more unstable. You know, you talked about all the equipment, you talked about things that could be slippery, it's a bathroom. And you don't want lots of different approaches in that one space. So knowing that, say, that it did take 2 years, it's a pretty realistic time frame for some children. Yep. If you had 3 or 4 different approaches for him to be learning that skill,
it would have taken longer.
Much longer, because you're so confused, right? So when you are accessing therapy, it's a really important time to go, okay, the things that I'm engaging in, are they all aligned with the same way of thinking? Because if you do something one way and you do something another way, you've now been presented with these options that you kind of go, which one do I use? Consistency is absolutely key. There's only so many ways that you can do things sometimes. So you want to be able to practice that same routine, that pathway for it to work. But my point with that as well, it doesn't matter what skill it is, it's all about the fact that your little boy was doing this himself. So you wanted him to be independent. So he had to think about it himself. You can't go to the toilet for him. You can't do it for him. He had to learn the skills himself. So that meant that he had to experience it. He had to think about it before he could do it. Toilet train is an interesting one because no one else can do that for you, right?
Very
for you
true.
to learn. But then you translate to something like a skill of, I don't know, sitting or standing or walking. For some reason, we feel like we need to put our hands all over our kids to help them sit, stand and walk. The realistic thing is what we want them to do is to do as much of it themselves as possible.
Of course,
So-
because it's part of their daily act, right?
That's right.
Yep.
And you're not always going to be there with him.
Definitely.
So what therapy you engage in that actually promotes that, which happens to be the most modern principles of neuroplasticity, is we actually need the person to practice it themselves.
Of course.
So your approach needs to be that they are self-directed, they're active, they're thinking about it as much as they can to that child's ability.
Right.
But if you then do that approach and then you have another approach coming in that has their hands all over them, doing it for them, you're just basically, I don't know, a way of seeing it is you're kind of nullifying the effect. So one way they're doing it themselves and another way someone's doing it for them.
Yep.
Now you've engaged in 2 lots of therapy,
Yep.
increasing your cost and time
And confusion to the
and
child.
confusion for what outcome?
That's right.
And it could take longer. So when I think about how long it takes, I often think about the approach. Think about the approach. And if you decide to go down the path where you want to try out the non-evidence-based ones, then I would say just give that a go. Don't mix it around because you want to see whether that's effective.
Yeah.
Because if that's not effective, then you can easily go, give it the flick. But if you're doing something with another approach that is effective, well, how do you know which one's working now? So you want to take your time to actually try one thing so it's consistent for the sake of the child, but also for the sake of your funding.
Definitely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. 100%. I'm trying to get my little boy to start, now that he's accomplished, obviously, the toilet training, the next bit is dressing. And at the moment, we've obviously low on funds. So I'm taking it on upon myself
Yes.
to try and get him to do that day in, day out. Still a work in progress, but it's just from the toilet training, you kind of get the gist of make sure he's steady, make sure he's in the right position, getting the shirt right.
Yes.
And then telling him, make sure the tag is at the back, on the back side. So when you're putting it over, and then putting the right hand through, then the left hand through, and then just pulling it down.
Yes.
That's putting it on.
Yes.
But then taking it off.
All the different
Exactly, a different kind of process, right? This is like shuffle all the shirt up to as near as the armpit as you can, and then the right hand over your shoulder, over your head to pull it over your neck, right? Every little bit of step counts. And he understands each particular process, but it's his physical limitations that make it that little bit difficult. It's a work in progress.
It is. And what you've just highlighted there as well is just to never undermine the value of yourself as a parent who sees the solutions themselves. Not every skill needs to be a therapist, has to be involved. The therapist might be involved to kind of go, actually, there's some really cool, nifty ways that you might better do something. Let me show you and give you some ideas.
Yes.
There's some different bits of equipment that might be really helpful for you, or little tabs that you can put on the shirt so you can grab a little bit more easily.
Yeah, I was thinking along that line too. Yeah.
So you can have that as the input, but the actual practice itself, it's instinctive for you as a parent to go, I don't actually want you to do it yourself, so I don't want to keep doing it for you. Can I show you the process? And it's something you're doing every day. You don't want a therapist coming in to see you every single day of putting on your shirt. One, you'd run out of funds for sure. But secondly, this is reflective of real life. So my encouragement for this as well is not to undermine your own skills and abilities as a parent to break down that task, but access your therapist when you need them to, just for those extra tips too. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, as a parent, we've got to play our part, right?
Yeah.
And they're our child. Yeah. So anything to cut those costs down.
Yeah.
Take it upon ourselves.
And it's a practical way of doing it too. Look, the other part of just putting onto that too is I obviously highly value the role of an intensive therapy block, especially if it's done right, especially if it's approached that is triggered by the child learning to do the skill themselves. The whole idea of an intensive therapy block is to give them an opportunity to intensively practice that skill in a way that replicates the way you want them to do it in real life. You need to work your way through it. So it is a matter of making sure you do that intensive block for them to learn that skill. And then if you teach it in the right way, so that means the child is actively doing as much of themselves, they're self-initiating, they're not being maneuvered or handled by the therapist too much at all. We're not the ones moving them around for them to respond. We're practicing the task. If they can do that, then once they finish that intensive therapy block, they've got those skills to keep practicing at home.
Oh, of course.
And the results, the research actually shows that if you do it that way and you do it properly with those principles in mind, those skills, when they go home, will continue to improve for the next 6 months.
Oh, I agree with that
without any other therapy.
I've seen it, right?
Yeah, right.
Definitely.
So you don't need to keep doing therapy at that point. You've learned it the right way. Go off and just do it, you know, and not keep doing more than that.
It's realistic. Right?
Yeah, yep.
To me, therapies are there to help, guide, show.
Yeah. They're not like a teacher.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then you take it home, and obviously you need to practice it on your own.
Yes.
Just like any normal person would need to do.
Yeah.
A specialist shows you and you take it home and you do it because it's everyday life.
It's true. So, I used to teach piano. You can't come to me and say, teach me how to play piano. So I teach you in my little hour and you go home and do nothing. You're not going to learn how to play piano unless you do that. So it makes sense. Yeah. We do it for sport. We do it everything else. But again, the key is that person is doing it themselves as much as they can. They're not being overly handled by another therapist or another person. They're thinking about it.
Yeah.
And the 2-year journey of toilet training was your little boy thinking about it, thinking about the process. And, it will come together with that practice.
Yeah.
And sometimes some skills do also take time and to know that. So I think sometimes you can run out of funds because you're just constantly throwing so much at it, and to get that outcome. But, we don't run a marathon in the space of 6 months. We learn how to run a marathon over the course of many years.
Very
so sometimes
true.
Things do take a bit longer because our bodies need to adapt.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we forget the conditions of a child too.
Yeah, that's right.
They develop in their own ways.
Yeah, they do. They do.
No, I agree.
So I think there's so much more to talk about this, but I guess just to sum up this area about how to make to make sure I've answered it properly. How do you make your funds, and in this case, NDIS funds last is, think about the approach. You want a consistent approach. Don't confuse the child with too many different ones. And the approach that we advocate for is what is evidence-based, which is all about the child doing as much with themselves. They're not being overly handled.
Right.
And valuing the parent, because you've got instincts that actually far outweigh anyone else giving you advice, because you actually, in this instance, you know your child well. You kind of know the little ins and outs of what might make it work. Yep. And when you have all three of them and you allow time for some skills to develop, you don't have to throw all of it in there all of the time. So a little intensive therapy block here and there is really good to get those skills to where they need to be. Sure. And if they're done well, you don't need them all the time. Because to be honest, you shouldn't be doing intensive therapy all the time. Right. That's not the design of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, intensive therapy fits in with our normal regular therapy as well. Scheduled in. I mean, currently we do it every 3 weeks.
Yeah, sure.
Within a school term.
Uh-huh.
And that's only if he needs it.
Yeah.
But but other than that, most of our intensive stuff is basically what kicks it off, and our regular therapies just carries it on.
That's right. Yeah.
And it works well for us. So hopefully this little advice will help the other families out there too.
I hope so too. I really do. Look, if anyone's got any other questions for Naresha, so we can follow up a little bit more here as well, we really welcome that you write in so that we can have a discussion about it today. But for now, we'll say goodbye and we'll talk to you all again next time. Bye.
Bye, guys.